If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. You've experienced that you can't rationalize/explain? I had just finished unloading a flatbed trailer full of hay, sat down on the back of the trailer and laid back to look at the night sky, when I suddenly felt like vomiting, like projectile vomiting, and there is also a plate and 5 screws in my arm, and it immediately started vibrating and felt like it was heating up inside my arm. The cows around me started to run in random directions and I'm isolated, no cell service, no person around for miles, when suddenly this meteorite lit up the night sky with a blue light like it was daytime for like 3 seconds. As soon as it lit everything up, I felt better, but I could see my cows running in every direction away from me. It was completely silent the whole time except for me and the cows. I like to think I'm a rational person. I don't really believe in ghosts and whatnot. But I remember something from when I used to take care of my niece and nephew when they were little, age 4 and 5 at the time. My sister's house was literally in the middle of nowhere. An old, creepy farmhouse at the end of a long private road, surrounded in every direction by woods and fields. There was nobody around us at all. Super creepy place at night. It was evening and I was taking turns giving the kids their baths and dressed for bed. My 4-year-old nephew was watching TV in the living room on the opposite end of the house from where I was in my sister's room getting my 5-year-old niece dressed for bed. As I was getting her in her PJs, she's staring out the window into the dark backyard, completely fixated on something with a concerned look. I asked her what she's looking at out there, and she says those kids on our trampoline. Obviously I look and see nobody out there at all. Now you're probably thinking she's just being imaginative or playing joke on me, but I think it's worth mentioning my niece was born with some mental disabilities that really limited her ability to be creative or imaginative when she was little. She was always very sincere and very literal. The concept of make-believe just wasn't something she grasped well. So it seemed really unusual to me that she would make something like that up, but that's what I chalked it up to. I'm a little creeped out, but I'm glad she's using her imagination, so I play along and ask what they look like and what they're doing. She says it's an older boy and a little girl, and they're running around playing on the swing set and trampoline. I say, that's nice. Sounds like they're having fun. And I lead her back out to the living room to watch TV, while I grab her little brother to give him his bath and get dressed for bed. After his bath, I'm getting my nephew dressed in my sister's room. He starts doing the exact same thing, staring out the window, and he immediately asks who are those kids on the trampoline? Now I'm fucking creeped out. What kids? I ask. The tall boy and little girl. They're playing on our trampoline. They shouldn't be playing on our trampoline. My nephew got really frustrated when I tried to insist nobody was outside. I was just like, okay, I'm done. And calmly noped out of there with my nephew. They were both so sincere about what they were seeing and were in separate rooms on opposite ends of the house when each one made their comments about what they saw outside. I really don't know what to make of it. That wasn't the only weird shit that happened in that house either. I know there's probably a rational explanation for everything, but it still creeped me the fuck out. A long while back, when I was living with my first girlfriend, my mom came to visit. One morning while they were in the kitchen, I was sleeping in, was in that state of half awake, half asleep, and could hear them talking in the kitchen. As I'm lying there, in that state of twilight, I start dreaming I'm on a beach, like a cold, North Atlantic beach, like the coast of Ireland or England, with a rocky shore instead of sand, and I can hear the footsteps of someone coming closer to me. I'm listening to my GF and my mother in the kitchen, and at the same time I'm listening to this man approach. The whole time, I could tell the man had a sense that he could see me as well, and then the footsteps get right up to me, and I hear them stop. Then there's a pause, and then son of a bitch if I don't feel his hand on my arm. And I sit straight up, freaked the fuck out, and I swear to God I felt the lingering sensation of a hand, as if it had just had a hold of my forearm lingering. Never told anyone about this. I often wonder if, one morning, a fisherman out in Ireland was out on the beach and somehow saw me in the mists, then reached out to see if I was real. When I was in high school we used to play this stupid game we called Michael Myers. It was basically just hide and seek but in the dark. You had to play at night with no lights on and the curtains drawn, no sounds playing, and Michael Myers had to wait in the basement for a few minutes while everyone hid. One night we decided to play while my mom is out working. It was my brother, a few of my cousins, my friend, and my little sister was probably 6 or so at the time. After a few rounds I am found first and have to be Michael. I don't like being the seeker alone, so I ask if my friend can do it with me. Everyone was fine with it, so we go and sit in the basement and wait. It's important during this part that you remain silent so you can hear where people are running to give you an advantage. After the 5-minute wait time we left the basement and stood in the office for a minute to let our eyes adjust to the dark. We left the office after searching briefly and went into the dining room. From the dining room you could see into the kitchen on the left and the living room on the right. We were pretty sure we heard everyone run upstairs, so we started heading to the living room when my friend said my sister was hiding on top of the fridge. I look over and she was peering through the doorway from on top of the fridge. You could see her hair hanging and she was small. I assumed my brother put her up there as a joke because she definitely couldn't get up there herself. I told my friend that we would just ignore her because she couldn't be seeker anyway. So we went upstairs to find everyone else. We found my cousins first. My brother was very good at this game, and since we knew where my sister was, we just gave up searching and yelled that he could come out from hiding. We switched on some lights and he came out of hiding with my sister. My friend immediately started freaking out and asked my brother if she had been with him the whole time because we definitely saw her on top of the fridge. My brother ran downstairs turning the lights on as he went, but there was no one down there. He checked everywhere in the house. No one. I really felt like he had to have been messing with us, but we would have heard someone moving around. The house was seriously dead quiet. I have tried to figure out everything it could have been beside my sister, but I just don't know what it was. It's really not a great memory and still gives me goosebumps. I never played the game again and was never really comfortable in the house after that. When I was younger, around 7 or 8, my mother, brother and I were living in a very old flat in a city a few hours from London. It's a pretty old place and there are slave trade memorials all over the city, especially close to where we lived. I used to have terrible night terrors, so my mum moved me into her bedroom. I remember it very clearly. It was a large room and her bed was to the right of me, while my bed was vertical and facing the bedroom door. It was small, smaller than a regular single, and had metal railings all around it. No clue why, but I remember it always made me feel safe. I don't know how soon after I moved into my mum's room it started, but someone began visiting me. I say someone because this did not appear to be an entity or otherworldly creature. It looked like a man. Every night, I would lie awake clutching the covers desperately, and waiting for him so I could scream. Don't ask me why I didn't scream first. In my child brain I think I was afraid if I screamed before I saw him he'd be mad. Every night I would hear boom. Boom. Boom, which was the sound of his boots on the stairs. He walked very slowly, so there was always about a 2 seconds gap between each step. Doesn't sound long, but consider how quickly you actually walk up the stairs. The boom of his boots would continue until he reached top, where he would slowly turn into my room. His boots would suddenly not make any noise, almost as if he wasn't even touching the floor. He was gray and faded, like a watercolor. He wore a straw hat that he had tipped over his eyes so the top of his face was hidden, plus his head was always slightly bent forward as if he was looking at the floor. He wore dungarees and a shirt underneath that appeared tattered, and in his mouth was some kind of piece of hay or long grass or something, which he chewed as he walked. He would make his way slowly to my bed, not looking up or changing pace, and the scariest part was I never could tell if he knew I was there or not. I couldn't tell if he was just coming in my room because he wanted to be in that room or he was there for me. Either way it was fucking terrifying. I mentioned I had night terrors before, because when I first saw him I thought he was a night terror. But then I started staying awake, and I waited for him because I was too scared to fall asleep and wake up with him stood over me. I know he was real. I felt him, I felt the presence of another person, I heard him, and I saw him. I would blink and then look, blink and look, and he'd still be there walking. Before he could get too close, I would scream, my mother would wake up, and I'd tell her he had come. Eventually she went to my granddad, her dad, for help. She was genuinely scared and didn't know what to do. I was scared in the day and scared at night. I was a wreck. She's not a religious person per se, but she is highly spiritual. They believed he was a slave. I don't know exactly what they did, but I wasn't allowed in that room for a couple of days. My mother had frankincense and some other herbs, and they spent time in the room speaking light and positive incantations. She asked whoever he was not to harm me, and to leave because I was afraid. After that he never came back. It was like he'd never been there. I'm 27 now. It's not exactly blood-curdling fear like it was back then, but every now and then if I'm in a room and walk into a dark hallway, I shudder thinking about him, and where he really came from. So I'm a member of what could at best be considered a militia in southern Colorado, at worst a bunch of buddies who really like rifles. We were camping and shooting and generally having a good time in the Sangre de Cristo range a week or two back, and I've never experienced something so puckering. Not in my time in the army, working private security, nothing. It was late on the last day of our little excursion, and we were all gathered around a fire cleaning rifles, drinking beer, eating some food when we hear this massive crack off to our north. It sounded close, like 100 yards close. All 7 or 8 of us are up with guns drawn, clearly trying to figure out what that sound could be, and we get the bright idea to go investigate the explosion sounding event. At night. In 30-degree weather. In one of the oldest ranges in the Rockies. Some of us have NV, some don't, but all of us have radios and headphones. As we begin to get closer to the area where the sound came from, I begin to get static and feedback on my radio, and I try unplugging my radio for a second, and it's still coming through my headset, and based on other members of my group grimacing, they all have the same problem, so we turn off the headsets and radios. We inch closer in a wide pattern, and my $3,000 PVS-14 shits itself. Spots appear on the lens, it starts to get really grainy and blurry, and then it shuts off. Again, my two buddies who also have experienced the same phenom. We come to a tree line and hold up on the edge of a massive field that we must have missed that morning. Me and one other dude elect to push into the field, rookie mistake I know, and as I get to near the middle of the field I notice a pit, about 20 to 30 feet in diameter in the center of the field. This isn't too uncommon as there are mine shafts all over the SDC mountains in SoCo, but this one seemed different, maybe because of the ominous mood, who knows. Anyways, I shone my 1500 lumen flashlight that usually illuminates about 350 m away, into the mouth of the hole, and I can't see the bottom. I am sufficiently puckered at this point, but the next two events happen simultaneously and I'll never forget them. As I'm shining into the bottom of the hole, I hear a weird combination of growling/chanting from the tree line around me. For a split second I thought it was my guys being dicks, but then the sides of the hole begin to shimmer in pairs. The sides of the hole is covered with hundreds of thousands of eyes, and then the same sounds from the trees begin to come from the hole. Me and the dudes hard noped from there, broke camp and doused the fire, and got the MC duck out of there in about 10 minutes, although it felt like hours. Moral to the story, if you hear weird noises out at night in the mountains of Colorado, don't leave your campsite. I live in an apartment with an area people leave free things to take. I was going through a bad patch and I decided to force myself to at least walk down the stairs and get the mail, just for the exercise. I came down and I saw this painting someone had left. The best way to describe it is if someone drew a dog as a human on a yellow background with big anime eyes. I don't know why, but it made me feel slightly better, so I took it up to my apartment. For the next few days, I felt like I was going insane. Like there was a voice in my head screaming all the time asking me to save it. It seemed terrified. One day I had an intense nightmare and my mom woke me up and I saw her eyes look like the painting, but I honestly didn't connect the two until my friend reminded me about the painting. I kept forgetting I had that painting for some reason. Eventually I put it back downstairs, but even that was difficult. It felt really wrong and I just felt like something was screaming into my head, terrified, the entire time. The second I put it back and went upstairs, everything went back to normal. It was gone from the area the next day, but it would come back every few days and disappear like people were taking the painting and leaving it again. Then it just disappeared. I showed people pictures of that painting and no one understands why I wanted it. I don't even understand. It just seemed nice. When I was growing up, my family lived in a small 2-bedroom trailer. My older sister and I had one room while my parents shared the other. My mom was convinced that it was haunted. From her bed she could see an old reclining chair in the living room. Some nights she would suddenly wake up and see an old man sitting in it, staring out the window. She'd always wake my dad up and send him to go investigate. He'd stomp in the room and turn the empty chair around. This apparently happened quite a bit. I believe my sister also used to claim to see an old man standing in her closet. She was young enough that she doesn't remember much, so I don't have any more story there. Mom also swore that some days she'd hear giggling and see a little blonde girl running down the hallway. At first she'd always assume it was me and go to investigate only to find the house empty. We moved out of that trailer after a few years. I didn't know anything about this until years later when I was in college. One of my childhood friends and I were hanging out at my parents' place when a paranormal show came on. My dad made a joke about the wife in the show always sending her husband to investigate noises in the middle of the night before following it up with "Who does that sound like?" After some prodding I got my mom to tell the story. She sticks by her story and believes to this day that, while the girl's spirit was friendly, the old man seemed malicious. If the story stopped there, I'd say it could just be my mom having an overactive imagination. However, my friend seemed freaked out by the story. She asked my parents where the trailer was. We lived in a small village, so it wasn't hard to pinpoint, and it turns out that one of her brother's best friends bought the trailer from the older couple that my parents had sold the place to. The whole family swore the place was haunted. They always talked about how a spirit of an old man would sit in a chair in the living room and stare out the window. The trailer passed through a number of different hands before burning down a few years ago. Many years ago, when I was a teenager, I went to a pretty secluded beach with some friends. We'd been hanging out at the water, picking shells and such like for most of the evening, and when it started to get very dark, we decided to head back. We had walked quite a ways down the beach and we couldn't see very well where the path back up to the road was, so I said I'd run up onto the sand dunes and take a look around to see where we were. When I got to the top, I could see the path wasn't too far away from where we were, so I made my way back down to let the gang know. I could see them sitting on a sand dune a few feet ahead of me, facing the sea, and I called out to them but they didn't turn around. So I made my way down through the dunes until I was right beside them and said hey. The person turned around and it wasn't my friends, but a roughly middle-aged woman, who was just looking at me with an expressionless stare. I apologized for nearly landing it on top of her, and then when I glanced over at the two people beside her, I realized that it wasn't two people, but big tufts of grass that my eyes had mistaken for the outline of people in the dim light. When I looked back to the woman, she was still looking at me with that same blank expression. I started to move away from her, and as I did, her face started to dissolve away into the sand. My heart nearly stopped there and then, and I nearly tumbled down the rest of the way through the sand dunes. My friends had been standing just a few feet away. It was probably just my brain playing tricks on me in the half-light, but I saw her face so clearly. It's been over 20 years and I think if I saw her again, I would recognize her. One morning, I woke up before everyone in my household. It was about 5:30 in the morning. Now, for some context, my house has an upstairs loft that can look down to the entryway and front door from one angle, and into the living room from another angle. I had meandered out of my room and looked down into the living room, because something felt off. In the living room, sitting on the couch and staring out the window was a light gray 20-ish-year-old woman. She did not move nor acknowledge me, but I was frozen in fear. Once I broke out of the trance, I ran to the other side of the loft, where I could look down to the front door. Standing there was a light gray boy, probably in his teens, with his hands in his pockets, staring out the window. He didn't acknowledge me either. I just started sobbing then and there until my mom opened her bedroom door and turned on the lights. I told her what I saw, and when we looked downstairs, they were both gone. To this day, I can't walk upstairs in the dark, because it feels like something is watching me from that living room. In high school I was dating this guy who was a real jerk, but I was too naive to see all the red flags. Anyways, one night I had a dream that he took a girl that I knew out to the movies and then back to his parents' home. I wasn't actively participating in the dream, but I was observing from above at what was happening. When I woke up my pillow was damped and I realized I was crying while I slept. Something about the dream freaked me the hell out, and I told him a few days later when I saw him. I described every single detail of it, down to which theater and what they were wearing. Instead of consoling me after he looked like he saw a ghost. Turns out, he did cheat on me with the exact girl around that same weekend. I only found out weeks later he had to tell me she thought she was pregnant. I think I scared him too, he probably thought I was a bruja. Hispanic people really believe in witchcraft. I've always had deja vu, sleep paralysis. I've seen some dark shit when I've slept. You know, the sleep paralysis demons. However, I've also seen things that I can't explain that have helped me or brought me joy. For a fact I know my first child is going to be a boy. Once my grandma came over from Mexico to visit. I told her this crazy story and she believed me, told me she's had similar experiences. Turns out it runs in the family. When I was a teenager I was a dork and liked to go ghost hunting and just investigating abandoned places in general. There was a large Victorian-style Catholic orphanage overlooking the Raritan Bay that was abandoned by the time I went to HS. Every time I would pass it I was curious and I wanted to see it up close despite the fact it was a known hangout for Satanists. My boyfriend at time lived about 10 minutes down the road from it, and it was actually accessible by a 20-minute walk up the beach and a hike up a small cliff to get to the orphanage. The orphanage faced the water and there were trees up the cliff. It was dusk by the time we made it up there and the end of January in NYC. It was cold. We go up to the front enclosed porch and sure enough we find bones, what appears to be bone and a noose. We started getting creeped out just being there and decided to turn back as we had a birthday party to get to that night as it was. As we turn towards the wraparound driveway in front of the orphanage we notice a late model American sedan and shit brown pull up. We are more concerned we got caught up there as it was still owned by the diocese and we didn't want to get in trouble for trespassing. As the car came closer I noticed a woman in a knit hat and an old school puffy ski jacket, think 70s, driving through car. The realization hits that I can't hear the motor if the car. I look at my boyfriend and he gives me a deer in headlights look before he farts back down the cliff towards the beach. I watch as the car navigates the driveway and drives past the orphanage. I decided to go run to the side of the building to see the car drive away to make sure it left. By the time I got to the point where I had a clear view the car was completely gone. There was no way the car could have turned off as it was a one-lane road back out to the main street a mile up the road. This is when I freaked and ran after my boyfriend. What gets creepier is about 6 weeks after this experience I had a dream of the orphanage burning down and the sky was pitch black. I was actually on the bus on the way to see that boyfriend when I had this dream, the route passing the orphanage. I woke up spooked before his stop but tried to forget it. Until about 3 weeks later, and sure enough the orphanage burned to the ground in what is suspected arson. It was quite a large building and the sky turned very dark despite burning during the day. So this was just over 2 months from when we saw the ghost car in front of the building. It's been 21 years since that happened and it still gives the chills. A month ago a seism was felt near where I live, in the Laurentians, Quebec. We rarely have strong seisms, they are usually very subtle and short. We felt a powerful vibration, followed by decreasing vibrations and a detonation-ish noise. I seriously thought something blew up a few kilometers away. My neighbors and I got out of our houses. I was expecting to see fire in the sky. Nothing. I waved at them and went back in. Then I get back in. I sit on my computer and I look through the window. There's a fucking smoke trail in the sky. There is a clear white line, almost horizontal. The Laurentians are a small region, it's just a system made of small towns all linked by public services, almost as if they all were the same town. For example, I don't have a grocery store where I live. I have to drive 10 kilometers to buy food. As it is a small region, the only resource where people shared about the event was Facebook billboard to sell stuff. Hundreds of people reporting the white trail, with a dozen of pictures. After 30 minutes the trail was barely distinguishable from the sky. After 2 days the government reported a 2.9 magnitude seism, closing the case. By closing the case I mean closing the case, they made a small report of 30 recent seisms and hours figured in it. That's all. 2 news articles relayed the exact same information from the report. Something obviously fucking crashed in the mountains and everyone knows it. I'm not a conspirationist, but as it was clear they are aware of it by everyone relaying the information, I think they are probably hiding whatever it was, or too stupid enough to check what it is. About a week ago me and my friend smoked a good amount of weed and went inside to listen to music in his room. Now don't get me wrong, we were both pretty stoned, but we weren't tripping or seeing shit. We were both just chilling, having a great time. Soon enough, the munchies kick in and we decide to leave his bedroom, down the hallway and into the kitchen. As we were walking into the kitchen, keep in mind it's about 4 a.m. at this point and the only light on was a night light in the kitchen, so it's pretty dark but you can still see in front of you. I saw a very small person, maybe 3 feet tall and very weird looking limbs, walk through the kitchen corridor into the empty dark abyss of the living room which was attached to the kitchen. It freaked me the fuck out but I didn't say anything because I thought it was just my mind playing games on me since I had smoked. I was actually more curious than scared because he didn't own any pets, nor was anybody in that house. It couldn't have been a shadow because I physically saw its body build and the way it moved. As we walked back into my friend's room, I sit down and before I could say anything, my friend looks at me and says, "Am I tripping, or did you see a small disfigured man walking into the kitchen?" We haven't talked about it since and that image of the person is still burned into my mind. Never have I had a bad trip from smoking and I've never hallucinated or seen visuals from smoking. This happened when I was still in high school. Me and my friends were at the top of a bell tower of a church a few blocks from my friend's house, let's call her Dana, sharing stories and whatnot. There was this guy which we'll call Mark who likes Dana. While we were in the middle of sharing stories, he and Dana stood up and said that they'll bike around the village and come back to us after a while. We agreed so that they'll have their private time. Half an hour has passed and we haven't heard from them. We then decided to come back to Dana's house and wait for them there. So we walked for about 20 minutes and as we near her house, we received a text message from Dana saying that they are coming back to the bell tower. We jokingly replied that we are still waiting for them there despite that we are now near her house. We went inside with her younger brother. A minute passed and we hear bikes braking in front of the house. We think it's Dana and Mark, so we told her younger brother to tell them that we are not here and still at the bell tower. Hearing footsteps toward the door, we scrambled to find a hiding spot, and we came upon their dark basement. We hid there, while her younger brother stood guard. One of my friends, John, was hiding with me inside a cabinet. When we heard voices going down to the basement, he whispered to me that something does not feel right. I noticed it too. The door to the basement suddenly opened and we heard Dana and Mark's voice, but deeper. Something was different. I felt it and I got goosebumps. After a while, the door closed again and we heard the two going out of the house. When the coast was clear, we went up and saw Dana's younger brother sweating bullets. We asked why, And he told us that Dana and Mark felt different. Suddenly John's cell phone rang. It was Dana. She was calling and texting us a couple of times already, but she said we weren't responding. She and Mark were at the bell tower from quite some time now. We were surprised. We cannot believe it. We thought that they might have pulled a prank on us. So, when we were finally reunited with Dana and Mark, we told them the story and they too were surprised. Dana told us that it may have been doppelgangers. To this day, I cannot even explain what really happened, but remembering those deep voices still give a chill down my spine. I absolutely hated my childhood bedroom. Being in it always made me nervous and uneasy, and not in the there's a monster in my closet kind of way, like in if I closed my door or was left alone and there's something bad would happen. This resulted in me never closing my door, never turning off my bedroom light when I wanted to sleep, never closing my closet door, making sure my parents' room that was across the hall had its door open. Once I moved into a different room, I was totally fine and basically acted the complete opposite way. My light was almost never turned on, my main door and closet door always closed, and now I was on the complete opposite side of the house. A few years ago I was talking to my mother about my irrational anxiety of being in my childhood room. She told me that the previous owner's son had died when they still lived there and his room was my old room. My mom told me that shortly after moving in she kept seeing apparitions of a little boy and talked to the previous owner, who then showed her a picture of her son, and that was exactly who my mom was seeing around the house and in the hallway near my room. I'm not really a believer of the paranormal and spirits, but it always chills me to hear that story. When I was about 16, it was around 3 in the morning and I was on my phone. I heard footsteps outside my room. This was weird, since my dad would never check on me in the night and my room was in the basement, or no one else is. Still, I assumed it must be my dad. So I put my phone under my pillow and pretended to sleep. The door opened and shut and I could hear footsteps coming closer. They were at the side of my bed now, and okay, so I tell this story to people and not everyone really understands this bit. Do you know that feeling when there's something pointy almost touching you but isn't? It's like a tingly feeling? Imagine that but times 10. Then I could hear footsteps walk around to the end of my bed and coming up on the side of the bed I was actually facing. The tingly feeling followed the steps the entire time. Then, suddenly I heard a super loud stomp. And at this point I still think it's my dad, so I'm just like WTF and open my eyes. Instead I see this dark shape of a person with hands reaching out towards me. Like it's about to grab me or choke me or something. I just stare at it for a moment before it just sort of, fades. So I turned my light on and didn't go to bed that night. Still pretty sure the basement is haunted. My closest friend lives in the house his grandparents lived, and died, in. He's schizophrenic, so when he would tell me the house is haunted I would just kind of nod. I got drunk over there a few times and he'd tell me how he woke up to an old man in his bed. I just chalked it up to hallucinations or sleep paralysis and ignored it. He went out of town for a week with his wife and I would go over and feed/play with his dogs while they were gone. One night I went over there, and almost immediately felt off. The best I can describe it is it felt like I wasn't alone. He had recently put in some new lights, and as I was walking around his kitchen the lights almost seemed to get brighter when I got under them. His bulldog was staring at the grandfather clock, which is where my buddy said they like to hang out. I quickly finished what I had to do and left. As I was walking down his driveway I heard what I could best describe as someone dribbling a basketball very quickly in his attic. I increased my pace to my car and got the hell out of there. This was around 10 p.m. at night. I texted my buddy the next morning and asked him to describe the sounds he would usually hear, and he described the exact same sounds. I told him what I heard and he said, "Oh yeah, that's just the old man." To this day I still don't go over there after dark. I ain't saying I believe in ghosts, but I do know what I experienced. I always used to go to the school plays back in high school. At the end of the plays, the actors would come out and greet their friends and family who came to watch them. Because I was good friends with most of the actors, I would often stay for the meet and greet and help them clean up afterwards. Anyway, one year I went to a play and did the usual meet and greet at the end. I took my phone and looked away for a minute to text my mom to come and pick me up. This took less than 30 seconds, but when I put my phone away, everyone was gone. There was a crowd of people chatting just seconds before, yet everyone was gone and they didn't make a sound. It was too quick to make any sense. But the creepiness doesn't end there. So I decided to just leave and wait for my mom outside, but both the gates are closed and locked. That's when things got weird. I walk around all over campus looking for a way out, but everything is closed and the lights are coming off and I'm getting more freaked out. After a while, I bump into a janitor and he opens the gate for me. As I'm leaving, the janitor what I'm doing on campus so late, and I tell him I came to see the play. He has no idea what I'm about. I insist that I came to see a play, but he says, "What play? There's no play today, there's no more scheduled plays till next year." It was freaky. I'm just left wondering what hell just happened that night, if it even happened at all. I usually don't believe in supernatural stuff, but it was a full moon that way and the clouds had this strange formation. This happened 6 or 7 years ago when I was around the age of 12. It was late at night and I was playing on my Xbox 360 with an online friend. I was in my room with the lights on and the door to the hallway was open. We were talking about something that I can't quite remember. But what I do remember is in the middle of his sentence my power cuts off. It had happened before so I wasn't too scared. It usually came back on after a few seconds. I'd have to turn everything on again. But it didn't. I began to grow a bit worried and was about to get up from my chair when I see a huge pink light slowly and silently float down the hall towards my parents' room. I stared at it, horrified and unable to understand what was happening. The light kept floating down the hall until I couldn't see its glow anymore. And as soon as the glow was gone, everything shot back on. But it was all wrong. I had an older TV that took some time to actually show anything when being turned on, but this time it turned on instantly. And my Xbox was now on the home screen instead of going through the Xbox loading logo. I would have looked around more, but I was too scared and quickly turned everything off and ran to bed. I was shaking so bad, but I managed to go to sleep maybe an hour later. The next morning I said nothing about it to my parents and didn't say anything till maybe about a year later. But maybe a month after the pink light I was sleeping in my room. It was around 4 a.m. when my mother came into my room shaking me awake. "Seth," she said. "What's the alarm password?" It took me a few moments to get out of the haze of tiredness, but I could hear the alarm going off now. "Hurry up," she said. The event with the pink light was in my mind instantly. It had been on my mind for weeks, and I had no idea if this was actually my mother. My 12-year-old brain was instantly suspicious because she of all people should have known the password. We walked downstairs together and I told her a fake password. But she said that was never the password. It was almost as if she could tell I was lying. "Seth, hurry up," she said again, but in a much more demanding tone. I finally gave in and told her the password. It was her birthday. How could she forget that? She typed it in and we went back upstairs to go to bed. She went to the end of the hallway to her room and wished me a good night, closing the door behind her. But I was shaken up now, wondering if that was really my mother. I could never get any straight answers out of her about that night. And I couldn't figure out what that light was. A few years ago I lived at a house on my college campus. My roommates were all at work at the time of this event. I knew each one personally because we were friends beforehand, and I knew their cars were gone, so absolutely no one was home but me. I'm sitting in my room watching a video when I hear what sounds like a cat pawing my door to be let in. We did not have a cat, nor was anything outside my door. 5 minutes later I hear it again and turn to the door and it stops. I don't get up this time, creeped out, and I read an article instead so I can listen for the sound and confirm what I'm hearing. Suddenly the noise starts again and I turn to find the door shaking slightly. I yelled out hello to see if I got a response. Nothing, and the door kept shaking for 10 seconds or so. I locked the door and just waited for a roommate to come home, only then did I look around and find nothing. Oddly enough, around the same time, I began seeing things right when I woke up. Every few nights my mind plays tricks on me right when I wake up and the image slowly fades away. Used to scare the shit out of me seeing an old lady standing next to my bed only to find it's just my imagination, but I've since gotten used to it. One friend began wondering if the pawing at my door was a demon that wanted in to possess me. I experienced a sighting of what would be best described as the Phoenix Lights, except I wasn't in Phoenix and this was 1 or 2 years before that. I'm somewhat of an aviation enthusiast and I live in an area frequented by all sorts of aviation traffic from military to civilian. In my lifetime I've probably been buzzed by just about every military aircraft the US uses, to include drones and stealth bomber/fighter. I've seen the military use flares, drop bombs, rockets, heard/seen weapons fire from a variety of military weapons, etc. But one night in my hometown I seen what I was pretty damn sure were just flares. Now I live in a city where that would be unusual, but that was my first thought. For the next 2 hours I observed these flares hold a triangle-like formation and travel along the outside edge of the city, eventually flying above my head at what looked to be no more than 500 feet. Only thing I could make out really were just 3 somewhat bright lights. Like aircraft bright, with something definitely in the middle of the lights, but gave off absolutely zero reflection of any sort. At one point I almost thought it was a helicopter formation, as I've seen them often assume a steady triangle formation while in transit. But aside from the one bright light at each edge of the triangle, they had none of the usual running lights, and despite going over my head somewhat slowly by 500 feet, made zero sound. I think the thing that creeps me out the most is, despite having stared at it for 2 hours, despite getting a reasonably close look at it, my only solid description for it is 3 bright lights in a triangle shape, with maybe or maybe not something occupying the space in between them. Even seeing it somewhat up close, I could not be sure if there was something there or if it was just my brain trying to fill in the blank. Another 30 minutes after passing over my head and now having completed a loop around the city, they simply blinked out of existence. Never heard really anything about it, except some random opinion piece in the newspaper not long after, wondering if the lights were related to a movie being filmed in the area, but no follow-ups to that or nothing else otherwise. Then the Phoenix Lights thing got popular around 1997 or so, and to this day seems to me to be the most accurate account of what I saw. Back in 1997, I was a UK student who had basically pissed up the wall my first 2 years of university. As my grades were pretty crap, I struggled to get a job for my third-year placement, so I therefore took the opportunity to work and study in America, or more specifically at Black Hawk College, Quad Cities, Illinois. At the time, there was a new venture where a local businessman was looking for international students to live in his new student accommodation at an old convent/girls' school called the Villa de Chantal. Google the picture. To say the place gave the chills was an understatement, and I couldn't wait to leave the place in the end. To set the context, the building was laid out with a wing on each end and a central area where there were small businesses who rented out rooms. I stayed in the wing where the nuns used to sleep, and it was basically big enough for just a bed and desk, but it comfy enough. The other wing was where the old girls' school was situated that had been closed down about 20 years previously. It had never been emptied though, and still had all these small children's desks set up as if they were still being used, apart from a good few inches of dust. The whole building just reminded me of the hotel in The Shining. I often heard footsteps on the floor below me at night, even though it was just me and a Russian student who lived there, and he was even more creeped out by it than me. However, apart from the ongoing noises, continuously cold rooms even though it was 100 degrees outside, no air conditioning, and relentless sense of being watched and followed was the following. In what was being used as a computer room for us to study, and there was desks situated in front of a stud wall. However, as I was going to be spending a lot of time in there, I thought I would reposition the desk to be by the window. What I hadn't realized, however, was that when I moved the desk, it was attached to the wall by a couple of screws, so when I pushed too heavily on the desk, it ripped it from the wall. As I didn't want to get caught, I thought I would just leave it where it was. However, when I was about to move it back again, I saw some colored writing behind the wall. With my interest piqued, I moved the desk further away from the wall, and behind there I saw the words that will stay with me forever. In red crayon it said, "The more you worship me, the more I will pray for you." In itself this didn't seem too creepy, but it was the way it was written that did it. It was more jagged rather than smooth. More angry, if you will. This shit me up, and I lived next to this room for a further 8 months. I learnt later that this room was the penance room, which was used by the nuns when they had to repent and seek forgiveness. The second thing that I really hated was the room right above the main entrance that was behind, hired by a small local bridal boutique. During the day it was fine, ladies coming to look at dresses for their wedding and such, but it was at night that it got creepy. The building manager used to shut off the main central building from the two end wings each evening and turned off all the lights for both the central area and the school wing, basically just leaving the lights on in my end of the building. For most of the time I stayed at the Villa de Chantal, I had a girlfriend and a couple of good friends who I liked to go out drinking with. I just turned 21, so I was making the most of it. When I used to go out for the evening, the lights in the bridal boutique would be off. However, every time I came back later, there was always a light shining in the room directly onto a wedding dress in the window. At first we all thought it was a bit of a joke by the building manager, and she wouldn't believe me, as when she came into work the following morning the light was always off. It was about 2 months later that we all went out for a party, and the building manager gave me a lift back on the night. Lo and behold, the light was on. She turned very white and said she would have to turn the light off, and asked if I would go in with her. Once inside, through the locked doors, we went directly to the room, but when we turned the handle into the room and walked in, the light was off. It was at this point that her car alarm went off and she pretty much crapped herself. After that day she never went into that room again and always left work by 5 p.m. I, on the other hand, continued to live there for another 5 months and ensured that I had a lock put on my room door. I heard years later that the building burnt down and is now a primary school. I can't help but wonder if the kids who go there now sense anything, or whether it was just my imagination. Oh, I got this one. I live right off of a state road near an elementary school, and literally everywhere near the elementary school is haunted because we have graveyards everywhere. Anyways, my entire family and I believe that my brother's room and my bathroom is haunted. When we were remodeling my brother's room, my dad would always just leave his tools in there and he would work on the room the very next day. One night, it was about 2 a.m., and my sister and I heard something drop. We walked into the room and we saw that there was a hammer stuck inside of the wall. We were freaked out and just decided that it would be best if we would fall back to sleep and that it would all blow over in the morning. The very next night, we heard a sound coming from our bathroom. We got really freaked out and went to investigate. There's something about my bathroom though. Every time you walk in, you have to check behind each door and inside the shower. There's no specific reason, it's just instinct at this point. Anyway, we went to go investigate until we heard the noise again, but this time it was coming from outside. We locked all the doors and turned on our alarm system to see if anyone would be around. Our doorbell has a motion sensor, so then if someone walks in front of it, we would be able to see. In that night, we literally didn't see anything from the doorbell, which made us crawl into the corner of our beds and fall asleep. I live in an old house that my dad grew up in. He claims it was haunted. Well, he once claimed that he once saw a little boy at the foot of his bed that smiled at him and then walked into the floor like he was walking downstairs. As far as we know, this house doesn't have a basement. What it does have is an attic, and this is my story. Now, our attic is weird. The door to it is actually outside and high up. You need a ladder to get it in. Anyways, I remember that one night, I think it was night, I was lying in bed when all of a sudden I hear the sound of a heavy box being pushed around. You know that SSSSSHHHHHHFFFFF sound when you push something along a dusty surface? I don't know how to describe it, but just put your hand on the wall and drag it down. That sound, but louder and deeper. No one should have been up there, yet here I was looking up at my ceiling listening to this. The only way I could rationalize it would be maybe a possum or raccoon got up there to mess around, but to this day I haven't heard it. I even remember banging on the ceiling with a broom and it stopped. That's not my only story though. Once my dad gave me a digital camera, so I went outside and took a picture of my mom's garden at night. Well, when I looked at the picture, it was right there. A little girl. The unsettling thing is I could see the detail in her face. Half of it looked decayed, like half of it was rotting while the other half was slightly better. She was all white. Now this is probably a camera glitch or a bug or something, but it was scary. What sucks is my dad took the camera back and at some point must have deleted the picture off of it because it's no longer on the camera. We are Catholic and very spiritual. A year or two ago we started praying as a family and overall became more religious, and ever since then the strange stuff has stopped. Our house before felt odd, but now it feels safe and comforting. But our yard outside, and especially our backyard where we keep our grandpa's old truck, something just feels off about those places at night.